Hello, everyone. My name is Jill Fluck, and I'm an educational consultant with Blast Intermediate Unit 17. Thank you for joining me for this session, Professional Judgment and Practice, Making Confident Instructional Decisions as a Paraeducator. This session is focused on the day-to-day decisions paraeducators make while supporting students academically, behaviorally, and instructionally throughout the school day. Many of those decisions happen very quickly and in real time, when a student is struggling, when directions are unclear, or when support needs to be adjusted during instruction. Today, we're going to slow those moments down a little bit and think more intentionally about how instructional decisions impact student participation, independence, and engagement in learning. We'll also spend time thinking through realistic classroom situations and how paraeducators can respond in ways that remain aligned with instructional expectations, student needs, and the paraeducator role. My goal today is really to help strengthen the decision-making process paraeducators use throughout the school day when supporting students. We're going to spend time applying our understanding of accommodations, modifications, and specially designed instruction to realistic classroom situations where decisions often need to happen quickly. We'll also clarify what is and is not within the paraeducator role, especially in situations where expectations may feel unclear or where students need additional support. And finally, we'll focus on how to maintain appropriate instructional expectations while still responding to student needs in supportive, thoughtful, and practical ways. This session is really about helping paraeducators feel more confident, intentional, and prepared when making instructional decisions in real classrooms. So let's get started with a quick reflection. Think about a situation at school where you feel unsure about how much support to provide. Maybe it's when a student shuts down, refuses work, struggles academically, or when the teacher is unavailable and you have to make a quick decision in the moment. Take a moment to pause the video and reflect on the situation that comes to mind. You may even want to jot down a few notes or thoughts before continuing. As you reflected, did you think of situations like worrying about helping too much, not knowing when to step back, uncertainty during difficult behaviors, or wanting to support students while still maintaining appropriate expectations? Those situations are incredibly common. And honestly, that balancing act between helping students and maintaining instructional expectations is exactly what today's session is about. To begin, I want us to think about how much decision making is already built into the paraeducator role. Even though these decisions may happen quickly or feel small in the moment, they can have significant impacts on students' learning and instructional access. Many of the decisions paraeducators make throughout the day happen very quickly and often in the middle of instruction. Sometimes those decisions involve how much support to provide, when to step in, how long to wait, whether to give a prompt, or how to respond when a student becomes frustrated or overwhelmed. And often, those moments happen without a lot of time to stop and think. Most of the time, adults are simply trying to help students be successful, stay engaged, or avoid frustration. But even small decisions can impact how independently students participate, how much thinking they are doing, and whether the original purpose of the task stays intact. That's why instructional decision making is such an important part of the paraeducator role. These are all examples of situations where paraeducators often need to make quick instructional decisions in the moment. That might include a student struggling academically, a teacher being occupied with another student, unclear directions, student refusal, or a student becoming overwhelmed during a task. In many cases, there may not be time for a long conversation or immediate guidance before responding. That's why having a structured way to think through decisions is so important. The goal is not to have a perfect response every time. The goal is to make thoughtful decisions that continue supporting student participation while staying aligned with the instructional expectations already in place. This is really one of the biggest ideas of today's session. Effective support requires both responsiveness and alignment. Of course, we want to respond to students' needs in the moment when students are frustrated, confused, overwhelmed, or struggling to engage. But we also want to make sure that the support we provide continues to align with the purpose of the lesson and the level of thinking students are being asked to do. In other words, we want to be responsive without unintentionally changing the goal of the task. That balance is at the heart of strong instructional decision making. There's an important difference between supporting students through challenge and rescuing students from challenge altogether. Sometimes discomfort, confusion, and struggle is actually a part of the learning process. If adults step in too quickly, give answers immediately, remove difficult parts, or lower the level of thinking too soon, students may miss opportunities to problem solve, persist, and build independence. That doesn't mean we ignore frustration or leave students unsupported. Instead, the goal is to provide enough support to help students stay engaged and continue moving forward while still allowing them to do the thinking and learning themselves. Before we move further into instructional decision making, let's briefly revisit accommodations, modifications, and SDI through the lens of classroom practice. Accommodations change how a student participates in or accesses a task, but they do not change the overall expectation. The student is still working toward the same goal as their peers. The support simply helps remove barriers that may make the task more difficult to access independently. Examples might include reading directions aloud, extended time, chunking information into smaller parts, visual supports, preferential seating, or organizational supports. The important thing to remember is that the level of work and thinking remains the same. The support changes access, not the expectation itself. Modifications are different because they change what a student is expected to complete, demonstrate, or learn. This might include reducing the number of questions, giving a different assignment, providing lower level reading material, shortening a writing assignment, assigning alternate math problems focused on a different skill level, or excusing portions of an assignment entirely. For example, if the class is expected to write a full paragraph response, but one student is only expected to complete a single sentence, the overall expectation for the task has changed. That's the key distinction with modifications. The level, amount, or complexity of the work is different, not just the way the student accesses the task. These are the kinds of situations where instructional judgment becomes really important. In real classrooms, decisions are not always completely clear-cut. For example, when does shortening an assignment become a modification? When does helping become over-support? When does simplifying a task begin changing the level of thinking required? Even something like giving hints versus giving answers can become a gray area depending on how much support is being provided. And honestly, these situations are where many paraeducators feel the most uncertainty because the intention is usually to help students feel successful and reduce frustration. The key is learning to pause and think carefully about whether the support is still maintaining the purpose and rigor of the task, or whether it has started to change the expectation itself. Specially designed instruction, or SDI, is instruction that is intentionally designed around an individual student's needs. SDI comes directly from the student's IEP and is focused on helping the student build specific skills over time. You'll notice a few important characteristics of SDI. It is planned, ongoing, and intentional. This is different from simply helping a student complete work in the moment. Instead, SDI involves targeted teaching connected to a specific area of need. Examples might include explicit phonics instruction, guided writing instruction, structured vocabulary instruction, or systematic math interventions. In many cases, paraeducators help support and reinforce SDI, but the instruction itself is designed and guided by the educational team as a part of the student's instructional program. This chart really summarizes the key distinctions we've been discussing. At the most basic level, accommodations change how a student accesses or participates in learning. Modifications change what the student is expected to complete or demonstrate. And SDI focuses on the instruction itself through intentional teaching designed around an individual area of need. Understanding these differences is important because they directly impact the decisions paraeducators make throughout the school day. When situations become challenging or unclear, this framework can help guide thinking and support more intentional instructional decisions. Knowing the differences between accommodations, modifications, and SDI is the foundation. But the real challenge is applying that understanding in real classroom situations where decisions often need to happen quickly and in the moment. That's really the shift we're making in today's session, moving from simply understanding the concepts to using that understanding to guide instructional decisions in practice. Because in real classrooms, situations are not always perfectly clear. Students struggle, directions become confusing, behaviors escalate, teachers are occupied, and paraeducators often need to make thoughtful decisions while instruction is actively happening. That's where professional judgment becomes so important. One of the challenges with instructional decision making is that situations often happen quickly. This next section introduces a simple framework to help guide those decisions in a more intentional and instructional way. The Clear Decision Guide is a simple framework designed to help paraeducators think through situations before reacting too quickly in the moment. Because honestly, many classroom decisions happen fast, especially when students are frustrated, overwhelmed, or struggling during instruction. Clear gives us a mental structure for slowing those moments down just enough to think intentionally about our response. Clear stands for confirm the goal, look at the plan, evaluate your role, align with the teacher, and record and reflect. Now, this is not meant to slow instruction down or make situations more complicated. The purpose is simply to provide a quick mental framework that helps guide thoughtful, confident instructional decisions while still staying aligned with the instructional plan and the paraeducator role. Before making a decision about support, the first step is to confirm the goal of the lesson or task. In other words, what is the student actually supposed to learn, practice, or demonstrate here? That question is incredibly important because it helps guide the type and level of support we provide. For example, is the goal reading comprehension, writing organization, solving a math process independently, participating in discussion? Once we understand the purpose of the task, it becomes easier to decide whether the support we're providing is helping the student stay engaged with that goal or unintentionally changing it. Sometimes students do not need a different assignment. They may simply need the task presented differently, broken into parts, modeled, or supported in another way. Confirming the goal helps keep instructional decisions aligned with the purpose of the lesson rather than reacting only to student frustration in the moment. Let's look at what this might sound like in practice. A student becomes frustrated during a writing assignment and says, "I can't do this." In that moment, it can be tempting to immediately shorten the assignment or reduce the amount of writing required. But before making that decision, we first want to confirm the actual goal of the task. For example, is the goal handwriting, organizing ideas, writing complete sentences, building writing stamina, using evidence from a text? Once we understand the purpose of the assignment, we can make more thoughtful decisions about support. Maybe the student does not actually need less writing. Maybe they need help organizing ideas, a sentence starter, chunk directions, verbal rehearsal, or support getting started. Confirming the goal helps us avoid changing the task too quickly before fully understanding what skill the student is supposed to be practicing. One of the next things we want to think about is what supports or plans already exist for the student. Before creating new supports in the moment, it is important to first consider, are accommodations already in place? Is there SDI connected to this task or skill? What has the teacher and instructional team already planned? Sometimes the support students need already exists. We just need to implement it consistently and intentionally. For example, a student may already have chunk directions, graphic organizers, extended time, sentence starters, or structured prompting strategies built into their instructional plan. Looking at the plan helps maintain consistency and keep support aligned with what has already been designed for the student. Let's look at what this might sound like in practice. A student begins shutting down during independent work and says they can't do the assignment. In that moment, it can be tempting to immediately simplify the work, shorten the assignment, or create a completely different task. But before doing that, we want to first look at the plan and consider what supports already exist for the student. For example, does the student already have accommodations in place? Is there a graphic organizer available? Are chunk directions already part of the plan? Is there a prompting strategy or support routine the teacher already uses? Sometimes students do not need a brand new support in the moment. They may simply need the supports that already exist to be implemented consistently. Looking at the plan helps maintain consistency, avoids confusion, and keeps support aligned with the instructional expectations already established by the teacher or educational team. This question is probably one of the most important parts of the entire framework. Am I supporting instruction, or am I unintentionally changing it? There's a big difference between helping a student engage with a task and changing the level of work or thinking the student is expected to do. For example, rereading directions, providing prompts, modeling a first step, or using a support strategy may help a student participate more successfully without changing the goal of the task. But reducing the assignment, skipping difficult parts, or giving answers may begin changing the instructional expectation itself. Evaluating your role helps pause that decision-making process just enough to think carefully about whether the support is maintaining participation in learning or unintentionally lowering the cognitive demand of the task. Let's look at what evaluating your role might sound like in practice. A student is struggling during math and becomes frustrated after getting several problems wrong. At that point, an adult might feel tempted to skip difficult problems, provide answers, or walk the student through every step. But this is where we pause and ask, am I helping the student continue thinking through the task? Or am I taking over the thinking for them? There's a difference between prompting a strategy, modeling one example, or asking guiding questions, versus completing the task for the student or significantly lowering the challenge. The goal is to support participation and problem solving while still allowing the student to engage in the learning process themselves. Evaluating your role helps maintain that balance between support and independence. Some instructional decisions require teacher input and collaboration. When situations feel unclear, it's important to pause and ask, should the expectations for this task remain the same? Is this a decision that needs teacher guidance before changes are made? Has the teacher already communicated how support should be provided in this situation? Alignment and consistency across adults are incredibly important for students. When teachers and paraeducators respond in similar ways and maintain shared expectations, students experience more consistency, clear routines, and stronger instructional support throughout the school day. This step is really about making sure decisions stay connected to the instructional plan rather than becoming isolated moment-to-moment reactions. Let's look at what this might sound like in practice. A student refuses to complete part of an assignment while the teacher is occupied helping another group of students. In that moment, it may feel easier to shorten the assignment, excuse part of the work, or remove difficult sections to reduce conflict or frustration. But before making those changes independently, we first want to think about alignment with the teacher and the instructional plan. For example, has the teacher already communicated expectations for situations like this? Is there an existing support strategy already in place? Is this a decision that should wait for the teacher's input before expectations are changed? Sometimes the best immediate response is not changing the assignment itself, but instead encouraging participation, offering support strategies, or helping the student re engage while maintaining the original expectation as much as possible. Consistency across adults helps students better understand routines, expectations, and instructional boundaries throughout the school day. Sometimes classroom situations reveal important patterns that are worth Sometimes classroom situations reveal important patterns that are worth noticing and communicating. For example, a student may consistently struggle with a certain type of task, shut down during independent work, become overwhelmed during transitions, or require repeated prompting to stay engaged. Those observations matter because they can help guide future instructional decisions and support planning. This step is not about diagnosing problems or making major instructional decisions independently. Instead, it's about recognizing patterns, documenting important observations when appropriate, and communicating those patterns with the teacher or instructional team. That communication helps move support from simply reacting in the moment to making more intentional and proactive instructional decisions over time. Let's look at what this might sound like in practice. Imagine a student consistently shuts down during independent writing tasks. At first, it may seem like isolated frustration or avoidance, but over time, you begin noticing a pattern. The student struggles more during independent writing, avoids getting started, or becomes overwhelmed when expected to organize ideas independently. Those observations are important because they can help the instructional team better understand what supports the students may need. In situations like this, the goal is not for paraeducators to independently redesign instruction or make major changes on their own. Instead, the goal is to notice patterns, communicate observations, and help the educational team make more informed instructional decisions over time. Sometimes the most valuable support is recognizing patterns that others may not immediately see because paraeducators are often working closely with students throughout many parts of the school day. As we move out of the CLEAR framework, all of those steps really connect back to one major idea. Changing what the student is expected to learn, complete, or demonstrate is outside the paraeducator role. Paraeducators play an incredibly important role in supporting the implementation of instruction, reinforcing skills, supporting accommodations, helping students stay engaged, and assisting with participation and independence throughout the school day. But independently redesigning assignments, lowering instructional expectations, or changing learning goals are decisions that belong to the teacher and the instructional team. That distinction is important because it helps maintain consistency, instructional alignment, and appropriate support for students across settings and adults. Now that we've worked through the CLEAR framework and the decision-making process behind it, let's apply those ideas to realistic classroom situations paraeducators encounter every day. Because honestly, instructional decisions rarely happen in perfect conditions. They happen in the middle of frustration, in the middle of instruction, during behaviors, or when quick responses are needed in the moment. These scenarios are designed to help us think through how the framework can guide real instructional decisions while still maintaining alignment with the instructional role and expectations. When students become overwhelmed, our instinct is often to immediately reduce the task, shorten the assignment, or remove the difficult parts. And honestly, that reaction usually comes from wanting to help students feel successful and reduce frustration. But before changing the actual demand of the task, we first want to think about whether we can adjust how support is being provided. That might include chunking the task into smaller parts, providing prompts, using visuals, offering encouragement, modeling the first step, or reducing distractions in the environment. Those types of supports can help students re-engage and continue participating without immediately lowering the level of work or thinking required. The goal is to provide enough support for the student to continue moving forward while still maintaining the original instructional expectation whenever possible. This situation happens all the time in classrooms. The teacher may be working with another student, managing behavior, teaching a small group, or handling something else during instruction. And during those moments, paraeducators are often the adults making quick decisions in real time. When that happens, existing plans, routines, and supports should guide decision making as much as possible. For example, what accommodations are already in place? What support strategies has the teacher already modeled or communicated? What are the established expectations for the task? The focus should remain on implementing and reinforcing instruction, not independently redesigning assignments, changing expectations, or creating entirely new instructional plans in the moment. Consistency across adults helps students experience clearer expectations, stronger routines, and more aligned instructional support throughout the school day. Here's another very common classroom situation. A student does not understand the directions for an assignment or activity. In moments like this, appropriate support might include rereading directions, rephrasing or simplifying language, modeling what to do, checking for understanding, or helping the student identify the first task. Those types of supports help clarify the task without changing the overall expectation. What we want to avoid is immediately reducing the workload or replacing the assignment simply because directions were confusing at first. Sometimes students do not need an easier task. They simply need clearer guidance, additional processing time, or support getting started. If a student consistently struggles with a certain task or type of instruction, that's important information, not just a moment-to-moment problem to solve. For example, a student may repeatedly shut down during writing, struggle to begin independent work, require constant prompting, or become overwhelmed during certain activities. In situations like this, it can be tempting to gradually lower expectations or simplify the work in order to reduce frustration. But instead of independently changing the task, we first want to continue implementing the plan supports while communicating observations to the teacher or instructional team. Those observations can help identify important patterns and guide future instructional decisions, accommodations, or additional supports that may be needed. This helps move decision making from simply reacting in the moment to more intentional instructional planning over time. When students refuse work, it can be very tempting to immediately lower demands in order to reduce conflict or gain compliance quickly. And honestly, that reaction often comes from wanting to keep the situation calm and help the student move forward. But immediately removing the difficult parts of the task or lowering expectations can unintentionally remove the opportunity for learning, problem solving, and persistence. Instead, we first want to think about how support can be adjusted while still maintaining the purpose of the task. That might include maintaining the original expectation, adjusting support strategies, providing encouragement, clarifying directions, offering choices within the task, or helping the student get started with the first step. The goal is not to force compliance or ignore student frustration. The goal is to provide enough support to help students re-engage while still preserving the opportunity to participate in meaningful learning. When students refuse work, adults are often trying to reduce stress, avoid escalation, or help the situation move forward quickly. Because of that, some very common reactions include removing the task immediately, giving answers, reducing expectations too quickly, or allowing students to completely avoid participation. And again, those reactions usually come from good intentions, not from wanting to do something wrong. But over time, if students consistently escape difficult learning tasks whenever frustration happens, they may miss opportunities to build persistence, confidence, and problem-solving skills. That doesn't mean we ignore student emotions or force students through distress without support. Instead, we want to think carefully about how to help students re-engage while still maintaining opportunities for participation and learning whenever possible. Before we move into the communication section, take a moment to think back to the scenarios we just discussed. Which situation feels most challenging to you and why? Is it when a student becomes overwhelmed? When the teacher is unavailable? When directions are unclear? When a student has ongoing difficulty? Or when a student refuses work? I encourage you to pause the video here and reflect on which scenario feels most difficult for you to navigate. As you reflect, think about what makes the situation challenging. Is it the pressure to respond quickly, the concern about student frustration, the uncertainty about your role, or not knowing whether to adjust support or seek teacher guidance? When you're ready, resume the video and we'll move into how communication can support these types of decisions. As we've discussed throughout today's session, many instructional decisions happen quickly and in the moment. And often those decisions involve collaboration between paraeducators, teachers, and the instructional team. That's why strong instructional decision making also depends on strong communication. This section focuses on how communication helps support consistency across adults, alignment with instructional expectations, and clearer support for students throughout the school day. We'll also look at how communication can help paraeducators navigate uncertainty, share important observations, and ask questions in ways that support collaboration and instructional alignment. Effective instructional communication focuses on observations rather than assumptions or conclusions. That means describing what happened, what supports were attempted, and how the student responded. For example, instead of saying, the student was being lazy, an observation might sound more like, the student stopped working after the second problem and required repeating prompts to re-engage. That type of communication is much more helpful because it provides clear, objective information the instructional team can use when making decisions about support, instruction, or problem solving. Focusing on observable behaviors helps communication stay professional, collaborative, and instructionally useful. These are examples of a communication that helps support collaboration, consistency, and instructional alignment across the team. Notice that the language is respectful, specific, and focused on student support rather than personal opinion or assumption. Questions like, how would you like me to support during this task? Or, should I maintain the expectation and adjust the support instead? Help clarify roles, expectations, and next steps in the moment. This type of communication also helps paraeducators avoid feeling like they need to independently make major instructional decisions on their own. As we wrap up this section, one important idea to remember is that communication is part of instructional decision making. Strong communication helps maintain consistency across adults, alignment with instructional expectations, and appropriate support for students throughout the school day. It also helps reduce confusion and uncertainty when situations become challenging or unclear. Paraeducators do not have to answer every question in the moment, but asking thoughtful questions, communicating observations clearly, and collaborating with the instructional team are all important parts of professional practice and effective student support. As we begin wrapping up today's session, I want to shift our focus from the framework itself to reflection and application. Throughout the session, we've talked about how instructional decisions impact student participation, independence, support, and instructional expectations. Let's think about one final question. What actually helps students build independence over time? Often, independence is not built by removing every challenge or difficulty students experience. Independence is built when students are given appropriate support, opportunities to think, chances to problem solve, and space to practice skills with guidance rather than having the work completed for them. That doesn't mean students should struggle without support. Instead, it means we carefully balance support with opportunities for students to remain actively engaged in the learning process. Sometimes the most powerful support is not doing more for students, it's helping students gradually do more for themselves. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on one idea from today that may impact your practice moving forward. Maybe it's slowing down instructional decisions, adjusting support before changing expectations, focusing more on communication and collaboration, or thinking differently about independence and productive struggle. I encourage you to pause the video and think about one takeaway that feels most meaningful or applicable to your work with students. Sometimes even small shifts in how we respond, support, or communicate can make powerful differences over time. Thoughtful support, strong communication, and intentional decision making all help create learning environments where students can build skills, confidence, participation, and independence over time. And at the end of the day, paraeducators play an incredibly important role in supporting both students and instruction throughout the school day. Finally, this is the question that I hope stays with you moving forward. Am I supporting access, or am I unintentionally changing expectations? That single question can guide many of the instructional decisions paraeducators make throughout the school day, and encourages us to pause, think intentionally about the purpose of support, and consider how to help students remain engaged in meaningful learning while still building independence and confidence over time. And honestly, simply slowing down long enough to ask that question can make a powerful difference in how support is provided. Thank you for participating in today's session. I hope you're leaving with practical strategies and ideas you can apply in your role right away. Your work makes a meaningful difference for students every day. Thank you for all that you do.